Opening. Being needed is usually described as security. In organizations, institutions, and systems of authority, usefulness is often treated as protection. Those who solve problems, carry responsibility, or hold critical knowledge are assumed to be safe. They are relied upon. They are consulted. They are kept close. At first, being needed looks like stability. But when we observe how power systems behave over time, a different pattern begins to appear. The more essential someone becomes, the more carefully they are watched. Need creates reliance. Reliance creates vulnerability, and vulnerability makes systems uneasy. This episode examines why power structures often grow suspicious of those they depend on most. Not because those individuals seek control, and not because they behave improperly, but because being needed changes the balance inside the system. What looks like value begins to feel like risk. Observation. In any structured system, rules are meant to be replaceable. Even when individuals are skilled or experienced, the system is designed to continue if they leave. Procedures, hierarchies, and redundancies exist to prevent dependence on any single person. When someone becomes difficult to replace, that design is strained. At first, this strain is not noticed. The person is appreciated for their contribution, their reliability is welcomed, their presence reduces uncertainty. They become the one who knows how things work, the one who can fix problems quickly, the one others turn to when something breaks. This creates efficiency. But over time, efficiency turns into reliance. Tasks quietly cluster around the same individual. Decisions pause until they are consulted. Knowledge accumulates in one place. None of this requires intention. It happens because systems gravitate toward what works. As reliance grows, the system begins to adapt around the individual. Processes bend slightly, expectations shift, others defer. At this point, the person is not just useful, they are necessary. This is where the pattern changes. Power systems are built to manage uncertainty. Dependence increases it. When too much relies on one person, the system becomes exposed. What happens if they leave? What happens if they resist? What happens if they fail? These questions may never be spoken, but they shape behavior. Attention increases, oversight grows, redundancy begins to appear. The individual may notice subtle changes. Their work is reviewed more closely, their decisions require confirmation, their autonomy narrows. From the outside, it may still look like trust. From within the system, it is caution. Being needed creates leverage, even if it is never used, and leverage, once recognized, changes how power responds. The individual may feel valued, the system feels dependent. That difference in perception is where distrust begins to form. Not distrust of intention, but distrust of position. The system does not ask whether the individual wants control. It asks whether control could shift if circumstances changed. This is why being indispensable often leads to pressure rather than security. The more necessary someone becomes, the more the system feels the need to contain that necessity. Safeguards appear, alternatives are explored, distance is introduced. What once looked like reliance slowly becomes something that must be managed. This shift does not happen suddenly. It unfolds quietly through small adjustments that accumulate over time. No conflict is required, no ambition is assumed. Dependence alone is enough. When reliance starts to feel risky. As dependence grows, authority often begins to shift in subtle ways. The person who is needed starts to occupy an unusual position. They may not hold formal power, but their absence would create disruption. This places them in a space between function and influence. Others begin to adjust their behavior around this fact. Decisions slow when the needed person is unavailable. Work waits, processes pause. Even when alternatives exist, they feel less reliable. Over time, this changes how responsibility is distributed. Tasks that once belonged to many begin to funnel toward one individual. This concentration does not happen because of ambition, it happens because it works. The system rewards efficiency, and efficiency creates gravity. As more weight gathers around the same person, the system begins to notice its own imbalance. What once felt like reliability starts to feel like exposure. The needed individual may feel trusted, they are asked for input, they are relied upon, the competence is acknowledged. At the same time, the system begins to quietly protect itself. Oversight increases, documentation becomes more detailed, processes that were informal become formalized. Knowledge that once lived with one person is slowly extracted and shared. From the outside, these changes look reasonable. From the inside, they signal unease. The system is not reacting to failure, it is reacting to dependence. This is where distrust begins to surface, not as suspicion of motive, but as concern over structure. Power systems are designed to remain intact under change. When too much stability rests on one person, that design feels compromised. The needed individual may notice that their autonomy narrows. Decisions that once moved freely now require approval. Their judgment is questioned more often. Their work is reviewed with greater frequency. These adjustments are rarely framed as lack of trust. They are framed as process, alignment, or risk management. But their effect is the same. The individual begins to feel constrained by the very role that made them valuable. Their importance no longer protects them, it exposes them. Meanwhile, others in the system may experience a different response. Some feel relief that safeguards are appearing. Others feel tension, sensing that the balance is shifting. The needed person becomes a focal point. Their presence stabilizes outcomes, but also concentrates attention. This concentration creates pressure. Mistakes, when they occur, feel larger. Delays feel more consequential. Even success can feel risky because it reinforces reliance. The system begins to ask not only whether the person performs well, but whether the system can survive without them. That question reshapes behavior. Succession planning appears earlier than expected. Redundancy is built quietly. Alternatives are tested, sometimes awkwardly. None of this requires conflict. The needed person may remain respected throughout, but respect does not remove structural concern. Dependence creates leverage. Even unused leverage alters how power behaves. The system begins to manage the individual rather than simply rely on them. This management may feel subtle, even benign, but it marks a clear shift. Being needed no longer feels like security. It begins to feel like a position that must be controlled. Not because the individual is dangerous, but because dependence itself is. Machiavellian lens. In historical power systems, dependence was never treated as neutral. When Machiavelli observed rulers, courts, and states, he paid close attention to who held essential functions. Advisors, generals, ministers, and administrators were often powerful not because of their rank, but because the system could not operate without them. These figures were valuable. They were trusted with information, decisions, and execution. But their indispensability made rulers uneasy. Machiavelli noted that power depends on control of outcomes. When too many outcomes rely on one individual, control becomes fragile. Even loyal service does not remove this fragility. A ruler who cannot act without a particular person is no longer fully sovereign. Dependence creates a limit, even if that limit is never tested. This is why indispensable figures were often both elevated and constrained. They were given responsibility, but also monitored. They were rewarded, but also isolated. Their access was managed carefully. Machiavelli described how rulers sought to avoid becoming reliant on any single advisor or official, not because they expected betrayal, but because reliance itself altered the balance of power. If a minister became too necessary, the ruler faced a dilemma. Removing them would cause disruption. Keeping them created vulnerability. Neither option felt safe. In response, rulers often chose a third path. They reduced the individual's autonomy while keeping their function intact. Authority was divided, oversight increased. Decisions required confirmation. This allowed the ruler to benefit from the individual's competence without surrendering control. Machiavelli observed that indispensable figures were often surrounded by procedures, councils, or parallel roles. These were not signs of trust, they were safeguards. The goal was not to weaken the individual's effectiveness, but to prevent concentration. In some cases, indispensable figures were gradually replaced without open conflict. Responsibilities were redistributed, knowledge was shared, influence was diluted. This process was often slow and quiet. Sudden removal was risky, gradual reduction was safer. Machiavelli understood that power systems do not like shocks. They prefer adjustments that preserve continuity. This is why indispensable figures were rarely removed at the height of their usefulness. They were managed instead. Their success became the reason for caution. The more effective they were, the more the system needed to ensure it could function without them. This produced a particular tension. The individual might feel trusted because they were relied upon. The ruler felt constrained because reliance reduced flexibility. That difference in experience mattered. From the ruler's perspective, indispensability threatened independence. From the individual's perspective, it confirmed value. Machiavelli's observations show that this mismatch often led to quiet restriction. Access was narrowed, decisions were shared, visibility was reduced. The indispensable figure remained in place, but their position changed. They were no longer simply useful, they were managed. Importantly, Machiavelli did not frame this as paranoia. He framed it as prudence. Power systems that failed to manage dependence often lost control when circumstances changed. Illness, death, conflict, or betrayal were not the only risks. Incompetence elsewhere could be just as dangerous. A system built around one person becomes brittle. This brittleness is what rulers sought to avoid. Machiavelli's writing shows that distrust of indispensable figures was not personal, it was structural. The system responded to dependence by attempting to reduce it. This response did not require wrongdoing, loyalty did not protect against it, competence accelerated it. Being needed was not a guarantee of safety, it was a condition that required containment. That is why indispensability so often preceded restriction in historical power systems. Modern framing, Greene. In modern power environments, dependence rarely looks dramatic. It appears as efficiency, expertise, or reliability. Someone becomes the person who knows how things work, the person others turn to when processes fail or decisions stall. In The 48 Laws of Power, Robert Greene repeatedly notes that being indispensable is a dangerous position, not because it signals ambition, but because it creates imbalance. When a system depends heavily on one individual, it loses flexibility. That loss is felt most strongly by those responsible for maintaining control. Greene describes how leaders often grow uneasy when they cannot function without a specific person. Even when performance is excellent, dependence introduces risk. It limits options. What happens if that person leaves? What happens if they resist direction? What happens if circumstances change? These questions do not require distrust to emerge. They arise naturally from structure. In modern organizations, this anxiety often appears as process. Documentation increases, tasks are redistributed, backup rules are introduced. Knowledge is extracted and stored elsewhere. From the outside, these changes look reasonable. They are described as best practice, risk management, or scalability. From within the system, they reflect concern. Greene points out that those who become indispensable often notice subtle shifts before anything is said openly. Their decisions require more approval, their autonomy narrows, their role becomes more defined, less flexible. The system begins to separate function from authority. The individual may still be relied upon to execute, but less trusted to decide. Their usefulness is preserved while their influence is contained. This containment is rarely framed as distrust, it is framed as alignment, structure, or clarity. But its effect is unmistakable. Greene's framing shows that indispensability often triggers preemptive control. Leaders act before dependence becomes a crisis. They introduce limits while cooperation remains smooth. This is why indispensability can feel paradoxical. The better someone performs, the more the system prepares for their absence. High performance accelerates redundancy. Greene also notes that those who are indispensable often misread their position. They assume that being needed protects them. They assume their value guarantees security. In reality, value attracts management. Power systems prefer replaceability. Replaceability preserves choice. Those who cannot be replaced easily reduce that choice, even if they never intend to use it. This is why modern power structures often move quickly to reduce reliance once it becomes visible, not through confrontation, but through redesign. Roles are clarified, authority is distributed, processes are standardized. The indispensable individual remains present, but their uniqueness is gradually reduced. Greene's observations align closely with Machiavelli's. Across eras, power responds to dependence by limiting it. Not because individuals are untrustworthy, but because systems seek to survive change. Dependence is efficient in the short term. It is dangerous in the long term. This is the modern form of the same pattern. Psychological mechanism, Part 1. At a psychological level, dependence triggers anxiety before it triggers distrust. Humans are highly sensitive to situations where outcomes rely too heavily on a single point. This sensitivity does not require suspicion or negative intent. It emerges from a basic need to reduce uncertainty. When a system depends on one person, the range of possible futures narrows. If that person changes, leaves, fails, or resists, the consequences feel amplified. The mind responds to this amplification by seeking control. This response is often unconscious. People do not think, "This person is dangerous." They think, "What happens if something goes wrong?" That question alone is enough to change behavior. Once dependence is noticed, attention shifts from performance to contingency. The focus moves from how well someone is doing to what would happen without them. This is a critical shift. As long as someone is merely helpful, their success is reassuring. Once they become necessary, their success highlights vulnerability. The mind does not treat these situations symmetrically. It weighs potential loss more heavily than ongoing benefit. This is why systems often respond to indispensability with restriction rather than gratitude. Another psychological factor at work is loss of agency. When outcomes depend on one person, others feel less able to act independently. This can create discomfort, even if the dependence is efficient. People prefer systems where they retain choice, even if they rarely use it. Dependence removes that option. The presence of an indispensable figure can quietly reduce others' sense of control. Decisions feel constrained. Alternatives feel weaker. This does not create resentment by default, but it does create tension. To reduce that tension, the system seeks to restore balance. It does this by limiting how much power, autonomy, or influence any one individual can hold. This is not punishment, it is regulation. Another psychological response is attribution. When one person becomes central, others begin to associate outcomes with them more strongly than before. Success becomes expected. Failure becomes magnified. This asymmetry increases pressure. The indispensable individual may feel that expectations are rising faster than their capacity to meet them. At the same time, tolerance for error shrinks. This combination is unstable. From the system's perspective, the solution is not to increase reliance further, but to reduce it. That reduction restores predictability. Psychologically, this feels safer than continuing to build dependence. The indispensable person may interpret this shift as lack of appreciation. The system experiences it as self-protection. That difference in interpretation is important. What feels like mistrust to the individual often feels like risk management to the system. This is why distrust emerges without accusation. Control increases without confrontation. Autonomy narrows without explanation. The system is responding to a perceived structural risk, not a personal one. At this level, distrust is not about character, it is about exposure. Being meted exposes the system to loss. The mind reacts by trying to limit that exposure. Psychological mechanism. Part 2. Another important psychological factor behind distrust of those who are needed is anticipation. Human systems rarely wait for problems to appear before responding. They act on imagined futures. The possibility of disruption is often enough to trigger control. When a system realizes it depends heavily on one person, it does not ask whether that person intends harm. It asks how fragile the situation is. Fragility creates urgency. This urgency leads to preemptive behavior. Rules are added, oversight increases, authority is redistributed. These changes are framed as preparation, not reaction. Psychologically, this feels responsible. It reduces anxiety by restoring a sense of control. From the perspective of the indispensable individual, these changes can feel confusing. Nothing has changed in their behavior. Performance remains strong, commitment remains intact, yet the environment feels different. This is because systems do not respond to present behavior alone. They respond to imagined risk. Another psychological driver is asymmetry. When a system depends on one person, that person has more potential leverage than others, even if it is never used. The existence of that leverage matters. People are uncomfortable with asymmetrical relationships when the imbalance favors an individual over the system. Even benevolent imbalance creates tension. To reduce this tension, systems try to rebalance. They limit autonomy. They introduce checks. They reduce discretion. This rebalancing often happens quietly. There is no accusation, no confrontation, and no clear explanation. From the system's perspective, explanation would introduce conflict where none exists. Silence feels safer. There is also a psychological desire for predictability. Systems prefer outcomes that are repeatable and controllable. Dependence on one person introduces variability. Even excellence introduces risk if it cannot be replicated. As a result, systems often value average performance that is predictable over exceptional performance that is concentrated. This preference is rarely stated openly, but it shapes decisions. The indispensable individual may feel pressure to make themselves replaceable. Knowledge must be shared, processes must be documented, uniqueness must be reduced. These requests are often framed as collaboration or growth. Psychologically, they serve a different purpose. They make the system feel less exposed. Over time, the indispensable person may notice that their distinct contribution is being absorbed into structure. What once made them valuable is being distributed. This can feel like loss. For the system, it feels like relief. The psychological mechanism at work here is not distrust of people. It is distrust of dependency. Systems seek stability. Dependence threatens stability by concentrating too much importance in one place. So they respond by spreading that importance out. This response is often invisible until it is complete. By the time the individual realizes what has happened, their position has already changed. They are still present, still useful, still respected, but they are no longer essential. This is how power protects itself psychologically, not by removing what it needs, but by making sure it no longer needs it as much. Closing observation. Being needed is often confused with being secure. In many systems, usefulness feels like protection. Those who solve problems, carry knowledge, or keep things running are assumed to be safe. Their contribution feels essential. Their position feels stable. But when we observe how power systems behave over time, a different pattern becomes visible. Need creates reliance. Reliance creates exposure, and exposure makes systems uneasy. Power does not respond to indispensability with comfort. It responds with caution. This response does not require suspicion, betrayal, or ambition. It emerges from structure. When too much depends on one person, flexibility narrows. Options shrink, control feels constrained. The system begins to imagine futures where that dependence becomes a problem. It does not wait for those futures to arrive, so it adjusts. Oversight increases, authority is redistributed, knowledge is extracted, alternatives are prepared. These changes are rarely framed as distrust. They are framed as prudence, as preparation, as responsibility. From the system's perspective, they restore balance. From the individual's perspective, they can feel confusing. Nothing has gone wrong, performance remains strong, commitment has not changed. Yet autonomy narrows, influence fades, uniqueness is absorbed into structure. This is not punishment, it is containment. Power systems prefer replaceability not because people are disposable, but because replaceability preserves choice. Choice protects the system from fragility. Those who are needed reduce that choice even when they never intend to use it. This is why indispensability often precedes restriction, not because the individual is dangerous, but because dependence is. Across courts, organizations, and institutions, the same response appears. When reliance becomes visible, power prepares for its removal, quietly, gradually, without accusation. The individual remains present, their contribution remains valued, but the system no longer allows itself to depend on them in the same way. What once looked like security becomes something that must be managed. Seen this way, distrust of those who are needed is not personal, it is structural. It reflects how systems protect themselves against concentration, imbalance, and loss of control. The pattern does not require conflict, it does not announce itself, it unfolds through small, reasonable steps that accumulate. And because it is quiet, it is often misunderstood. Noticing this pattern does not resolve it, it does not offer protection from it, it simply makes visible how power responds when reliance grows too strong. Until the next observation.